It started as any other weekend morning. My dad had left early for work, leaving me, my mom, and my younger brother at home. Dad's absence was routine. He worked tirelessly to keep us comfortable. I admired him for that, but I sometimes wondered if he noticed how distant things had become at home. There was a quiet heaviness in the air, the kind you could feel but couldn't quite explain. It wasn't the kind of thing anyone talked about, though. We just carried on with our routines, pretending everything was fine. That morning I woke up later than usual. The sun was already streaming through my window, warming the room in a way that made it hard to get out of bed. From the kitchen I could hear the familiar sounds of pots clinking and the low hum of my mom moving around. For a moment everything seemed normal, but something was different. The usual calmness of our weekends felt strained, like there was an undercurrent of something unspoken. My mom asked me to help with chores, a normal request, but there was something strange about her tone that day, hurried, almost nervous. She didn't make eye contact, which wasn't like her. My mom was the type of person who was always in control, always focused. But today her energy felt scattered. She kept checking the clock, her glances quick and deliberate, as if she were waiting for something or someone. I brushed it off at first, assuming she was just having one of those days, but the feeling lingered, gnawing at the back of my mind. I tried to shake it off as I went about my tasks, folding laundry and wiping down the counters, but it was hard to ignore the way she seemed distracted. Then the doorbell rang. It wasn't unusual for people to stop by, neighbors, delivery drivers, even my dad's friends. But when I peeked out of the corner of my eye and saw who it was, something inside me shifted. A man stood at the door, not a stranger, but not someone I expected to see that morning either. He was one of Dad's coworkers, someone who had come over for barbecues and family gatherings. My mom let him in with a smile that didn't feel casual. It wasn't just polite, it was warm in a way that made my stomach twist. He stepped inside, and they exchanged a look that made my chest tighten. Something was wrong. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I already knew this wasn't just a friendly visit. I tried to act like I didn't notice, but my mind was racing. Why was he here? And why did my mom seem so familiar with him? It wasn't uncommon for my dad's coworkers to visit now and then, but usually it was with a reason, dropping off papers, picking up tools, something work-related. This didn't feel like that. This felt different, personal, in a way that made my stomach churn. I stayed in my room, trying to focus on my phone, but I couldn't concentrate. My fingers scrolled aimlessly through apps, but my ears were locked onto the faint sounds coming from the living room. I couldn't hear every word, but the tone of their voices told me enough. They weren't talking like coworkers. The way they laughed, the way their voices dipped into softer, more private tones, it wasn't casual. I hated how my mind started to piece things together, drawing conclusions I didn't want to believe. The way they sat close, their low voices blending with occasional laughter, felt wrong. My mom wasn't acting like herself. She was usually so composed, so predictable in her actions, but now she seemed different, nervous yet oddly comfortable in his presence. I told myself I was imagining things, maybe I was overthinking, letting my insecurities or paranoia get the best of me. But deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't innocent. It was like my body knew before my mind could fully process it. A heavy sense of dread creeping into my chest. Then I caught glimpses that made it impossible to ignore. I walked past the hallway under the pretense of grabbing a snack from the kitchen, and I saw them sitting together. The way my mom leaned toward him, her hand brushing his arm, wasn't casual. It was intimate. My heart sank. I hurried back to my room, my mind spinning. My mom had always been the anchor of our family, the person who kept everything together. Seeing her like this, acting in a way that felt so out of character, shattered something inside me. It wasn't just about what she was doing, it was about what it meant. If she could betray my dad like this, what else could she lie about? What did this mean for our family, for everything I thought was real? I felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling, and I was powerless to stop it. I didn't want to believe it, but the truth was staring me in the face, and I couldn't look away. I wasn't prepared for the whirlwind of emotions that hit me. Anger, sadness, disgust. They all came crashing down at once, leaving me breathless and overwhelmed. It wasn't just the betrayal itself, it was the fact that it was my mom. The person I'd always looked up to, trusted, and believed would never do something like this. And yet, here I was, sitting alone in my room, grappling with the reality of what I'd seen. I felt trapped, like I was carrying a weight that wasn't mine to bear. The images of her with that man replayed in my mind, over and over again, like a movie I couldn't pause. Every laugh, every touch, every glance, they all felt like daggers aimed directly at everything I thought I knew about my family. My chest ached with the sheer unfairness of it. Anger bubbled up inside me, sharp and unforgiving. How could she do this? How could she betray my dad, the man who worked tirelessly to provide for us? He trusted her completely, and she was throwing it all away. The thought of him coming home, tired but smiling, completely oblivious to what was happening behind his back, made my stomach turn. But then sadness crept in, soft and suffocating. I didn't want this to be real. I didn't want to believe that my mom was capable of something like this. I kept thinking about all the moments she'd taught me about honesty, about loyalty, about doing the right thing. How could she say those things and then do this? It felt like everything she'd ever told me was a lie. I started to wonder if I had been blind to it all along. Were there signs I'd missed? Moments that should have made me question things but didn't? The guilt of not seeing it sooner weighed on me. Maybe if I had noticed, I could have stopped it. Maybe if I'd said something, it wouldn't have gone this far. And then there was the disgust. Not just at her, but at myself. I hated knowing what I knew. I hated being part of this ugly, messy truth. I felt like a traitor just for keeping quiet, for not running straight to my dad and telling him everything. But what would that accomplish? Would it fix anything, or would it just tear us all apart? I felt torn, stuck in a situation I didn't ask for and didn't know how to handle. Every minute felt heavier than the last, and I couldn't see a way out. All I knew was that this secret was too much for me to carry, but I didn't know who to turn to. So I sat there, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt before. Later that afternoon, I heard them talking again. The tone of their voices had shifted. The soft, casual exchanges I'd overheard earlier were now replaced with hurried, hushed whispers. My mom's voice carried an edge of urgency that I couldn't ignore. It was like she was trying to wrap everything up before time ran out. I stayed in my room, my heart pounding as I strained to make out their words. And then I heard it, the sentence that froze me in place. "Let's do this quickly before he gets back," she said. I didn't need to ask who he was. She meant my dad. My stomach dropped, and for a moment I felt like I couldn't breathe. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She was calculating, planning, treating this like it was just another task to get through before Dad returned home. I couldn't wrap my head around it, the sheer audacity of it all. My dad wasn't just some absent figure in our lives, he was the backbone of our family, the one who worked endless hours to give us everything we had. And here she was, acting like his trust, his love didn't matter. Acting like he was nothing more than an obstacle to avoid. My emotions were a storm of anger and helplessness. I wanted to march out there and scream at her, demand answers, and let her know that I knew everything. But at the same time, fear held me back. Fear of what she might say, of how she might try to justify it. Fear of what this revelation would do to our family. I felt paralyzed, torn between wanting to protect my dad and not wanting to destroy what little normalcy we had left. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands gripping the sides tightly, as I listened to the sound of the front door opening. His footsteps echoed down the hallway as he left, and just like that, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. I waited, expecting my mom to come and check on me, but she didn't. She went about her day like nothing had happened, humming softly as she cleaned the kitchen. It was infuriating. How could she act so calm, so normal, after what she'd just done? The casual way she carried herself made it even worse, like this betrayal wasn't weighing on her at all. I felt like I was the only one drowning in this mess, while she floated through the day untouched. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to ask her how she could look Dad in the eye when he came home, how she could kiss him goodnight after everything. But the words stayed locked in my throat, and the weight of the truth pressed heavier on my shoulders. That night, Dad came home, exhausted as always. I could hear the familiar sound of his keys jingling as he unlocked the door, followed by his heavy footsteps. There was a comfort in that sound, a sense of stability that I had always associated with him. But tonight it felt different. Knowing what I knew, I couldn't meet his gaze. He walked into the kitchen, greeted Mom with a tired but genuine smile, and kissed her on the cheek. She turned to him with the same effortless warmth she always did, asking him about his day, laughing at his jokes, and pretending nothing had changed. Watching her act so normal, so unaffected, made my skin crawl. I felt like I was watching a lie unfold in real time, one that only I could see. Dad sat down at the table, his shoulders slumped from a long day. He looked at me and asked how my day had been, his voice kind and full of genuine care. I wanted to answer him, to smile back like I always did, but the words got caught in my throat. All I could manage was a quiet, "It was fine," as I stared at my plate, avoiding his eyes. I felt sick. The guilt of knowing what I knew was unbearable. Every time Dad smiled at Mom or thanked her for dinner, I felt like I was betraying him by staying silent. I kept imagining how he would react if he found out. Would it break him? Would it destroy our family? The thought of him losing the trust he had in her, in us, was enough to keep me quiet. But staying quiet didn't make it any easier. After dinner, Dad went to the living room to watch TV, his usual way of unwinding. I stayed in the kitchen pretending to clean up, but really I just needed space. Mom stood at the sink, washing dishes, humming a soft tune like nothing had happened. The sight of her standing there, so calm, so composed, made my anger flare again. How could she act like this? How could she carry on like everything was fine? But what could I do? Every time I thought about confronting her or telling Dad, I felt paralyzed. I didn't know how to start, what to say, or what the fallout would be. So I stayed silent, letting the weight of the secret crush me a little more each day. Now every moment with Dad feels different. His laughter, his kindness, his trust, it all feels fragile, like it's hanging by a thread I could cut with a single word. I don't know how long I can carry the secret, but I know it's already tearing me apart.